Thank you so much for the question. So for an infant or baby hat, this is a life-size baby doll that I got off of Amazon. Her head circumference is, I'll get my tape around here, it's 14.5 inches. So on the Craft Yarn Council or yarnstandards.com, they say between 14 to 16.5 inches is standard head circumference for a baby. This hat I made on the 40 needle circular knitting machine, and he is 66 rows. So you can see it's a bit long, so you have to fold up the brim. So I definitely recommend, if you have the 40 needle circular knitting machine and you make this in 66 rows, to tack that brim up so it doesn't cover their eyes accidentally. What I prefer to do is 60 rows. This one is 60 rows that I made, and so this way it's not going to cover their little eyes. But when using the 48 circular knitting machine, if you did 60 rows making a double layer beanie hat, it's just too big for their smaller head circumference. So there's a couple of ways that I have changed this, but we have to make the hat in a different way. So with our 48 circular knitting machine, we're going to cast on with waste yarn, and we're going to go over and under each needle one time around to cast on, and we want to use waste yarn that's a similar weight to the project yarn, but in a contrasting color. And you don't want it extremely tight and you don't want it overly loose. You kind of want it just right, touching the needles. Once we get back around to our white needle, we are going to do a few rows of waste yarn. I like between 5 and 7 rows for this. Once we get that done, put your yarn in the middle of the machine. And now I'm going to do 1 row with our ravel cord, and this will make it really easy to remove the waste yarn at the end of the project. So once our ravel cord is done, now we're going to add in our project yarn. And you'll see I'll always end my row at that 48th needle, the white needle, and then I will add in yarn on the left side of the white needle. So starting at my number 1 needle. And this just helps to keep the rows even. I always try to start and end my rows at between that 48th and 1st needle when I'm adding more yarn. So now we're going to start making the rows of our project. So I wasn't sure how many rows I needed to do when I started recording this. So you're going to see me measure the tube a few times because I was trying to get to around that 14.5 inches for the infant head circumference, but it ended up being 70 rows. And this is using a number 4 medium weight yarn, and it is the Premier, or no, not Premier. It is a Big Twist Value brand yarn that I used in this blue color to make this baby hat. So as you can see, I'm cranking my rows, and then you will see eventually I'll start measuring it. And so if you need to make a larger one using this method, if you need to make a larger head circumference, you'll just want to get your tape measure and measure it a few times until you get to the length that you want. And I'll show you why we're doing it this way once we get done. So now I'm ending my last row at my 48 white needle there, and I'm going to cut the yarn and have excess tail and put it into the middle of my machine on the left side of my needle. Now I'm going to grab more waste yarn, again a similar weight. This is a number 4 medium weight yarn, but in a contrasting color. And again, I'll do between 5-7 rows. I usually just like to let the yarn run out, and then I'll crank it once around and it falls off the machine. So now what we're going to do, we stretch this out, and we are going to slip stitch the 2 rounds together. So essentially, if you were making an ear warmer headband, if you made any of those, that's kind of what we're making here, just a lot narrower for an infant's head. So this is why you want a contrasting color waste yarn, so we can pick up the first row of blue yarn on either side of the tubes, and we're going to slip stitch them back and forth all the way around to make our tubes. So you can see the first row of the blue yarn, it's sandwiched in between this cream color yarn, and those are the live stitches. And we just go back and forth slip stitching them together, and then we can remove our waste yarn, and all those live stitches will be secured because we slip stitch them together in the round in the tube. And I really like using this method. You just want to make sure you pick up each of those stitches. So before you remove your waste yarn, check to see if you have any holes. If you do, then that means you've missed one of the stitches. So just undo your slip stitches and then it will be fine. Once that's done, then we remove the waste yarn and you'll get something that looks like this. I forgot to hit record when I removed the waste yarn, so take a look at my waste yarn tutorial. I linked it in the video description. So now pretty much we have a smaller version of an ear warmer if you've seen my ear warmer tutorials. Now just take the end of your project yarn that you still have connected to the project and put it on a needle, and you're just going to weave in and out the stitches around the outside edge, which makes the drawstring effect. So I just started where we slip stitched everything together. Once I get all the way around, now we just pull it tight to cinch it closed. Next thing that I like to do is to get my needle again, and then we're just going to sew it back and forth a few times to make sure that round part stays close, nice and tightly. Because when you wash it and dry it and do different things, if you just knot it, that hole seems to kind of loosen up over time. But if you sew it back and forth a few times, that seems to work really well to keep it tight. So I just sew him a little bit. And then once you've sewed it enough that you like it, I flipped it over to what I'm going to make the inside to sew it. And then you can just knot it and cut off any excess, weave in the ends through the 2 layers of the beanie hat and cut off any excess of your yarn once you're done. So at this point, I tried on the baby and it's still longer than what it needs to be. So that brim needs to fold up. So what I'm going to do here is I don't want it to fall into the baby's eyes. So I measured and then I added on some extra waste yarn extra yarn that I have. And I'm just doing a whip stitch all the way around to make sure that that brim stays up and does not fall into her eyes. And so I just do that all the way around. And I did about 1 inch. And I just made sure it was even. And then I just knot it a few times once I go all the way around. And it kind of made a really nice pattern for the hat as well. And then I just knotted it and weaved in the ends. And so now it looks like this on the baby. So it's a little bit of a thick brim, but this is one way that you can make the infant size beanie hat. On the 48 needle circular knitting machine, if you don't like how thick that brim looks, here's what it is on the 40 needle circular knitting machine at 60 rows, making it a double layer. And then I'll also put in the video description below, I'll tag the video that I did making the panel on the 48 needle circular knitting machine, but only using 40 needles. And it pretty much looks the same as making it on a 40 needle.